Alright, welcome to my garage. Obviously there's a lot going on here, but if you give me a second, I'll explain how I got here and why it made me think of a book by Jules Verne. So earlier today, I submitted my dissertation to my committee for review, which means that I have 2 weeks until I have to defend it. But right before I submitted that dissertation, I got a text from the mother of a fraternity house on campus, and she was saying that it is lumber season again. And what that means is that the fraternity house has built their annual structure on their property using a whole bunch of fresh, nice lumber. And they've partied in it for a long time, judging by how much beer is spilled on it. And they've torn it down and thrown it in their yard and are desperately looking for somebody to help them get rid of that lumber. Obviously, I'm very willing to help them do that. So for years, I've gone to this frat house and harvested tons of lumber from them and used it in tons of projects in my own property. And so tonight, though I'm supposed to be celebrating having submitted my dissertation, I am processing tons of lumber and trying to assimilate it into my garage because I'm going to be picking up more lumber tomorrow. But while I'm trying to fit it into my garage, I thought it was time to get rid of all of these tins of seed that I have. And it is these seeds that made me think of The Mysterious Island by Jules Verne. So if you've never read The Mysterious Island, know that it is like the Robinson Crusoe story or the Swiss Family Robinson story, except for that Verne wanted to make his castaways produce everything from scratch, which makes it obviously much harder on them. The story begins during the Civil War at a Confederate fort that is under siege by Union forces. And to escape the siege and signal for help, they decide to build a hot air balloon. I don't know how historically accurate that is, but that's what they decide to do. But as they're waiting for good weather to release this hot air balloon, some Union prisoners in the fort commandeer it and steal it on a stormy night. And the storm blows them really far into some ocean, which I honestly don't remember which one it was. But as the balloon is beginning to deposit them in the water, they realize they don't just want to be stranded in the middle of the water, so they throw overboard anything that has weight. And that makes the hot air balloon light enough to fly a bit further and deposit them on an island, the Mysterious Island. But when they fall off the balloon, it lightens and flies off without them, leaving them stranded on the shore of this island with nothing but the clothes on their backs. There's no convenient shipwreck full of animals and tools for them to use while they try to survive. In fact, he talks about that at the beginning of chapter 6. He says, "The inventory of objects possessed by these castaways from the sky, thrown down onto the coast that appeared to be uninhabited, was soon taken." So the inventory was soon taken. "They had nothing except the clothes on their backs at the moment of the catastrophe. There was a notebook and a watch that Gideon Spilett had saved, inadvertently, no doubt. But there was not a single weapon, not a tool, not even a pocket knife. The balloon passengers had thrown everything overboard in order to lighten their craft. The imaginary heroes of Daniel Defoe or of Wyss, as well as the Selkirks and the Renals, castaways at Juan Fernandez and the archipelago of Auckland, never found themselves so entirely helpless. These men had abundant resources of grain, animals, tools, and munitions drawn from their stranded vessels, or else some wreckage had washed up along the shore which allowed them to provide for the necessities of life. They were not, at the outset, so absolutely defenseless before the rigors of nature. They," meaning his own castaways, "owned no instrument whatsoever, not a utensil. From nothing, the castaways would need to supply themselves with everything." And I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that they do succeed in doing that. But after they've gotten kind of settled and are able to survive nicely, he doesn't think it's cheating too much to make them find a single grain of wheat in one of their pockets. And from this single grain of wheat, they're able to grow a whole plant, which is able to produce more seeds, and they have a whole crop later on. And that is what made me think of the book tonight, because I'm about to dispose of all these lovely labeled tins full of seeds. Things like rice and barley and wheat and oats and alfalfa, all these very useful plants I'm just going to get rid of. And I would think about how much they would value these on their island instead of just their single grain of wheat. What might be a spoiler, however, is the utterly fantastic degree to which they end up thriving on this island. They end up making a fully functional society, complete with elevators and telegraphs. And when he compares the success of his castaways to that of the Robinsons, he says, "They had accomplished 100 times more than the Robinsons of a bygone time, for whom everything was done miraculously. They had knowledge, and the man who has knowledge succeeds where others would vegetate and inevitably perish." Now, this is kind of a cocky statement given that his characters are helped by the miraculous richness of the natural resources on the island. Some other things help him along the way, but I won't talk about those. To give you context, though, at this point in the book, the castaways have long since started to produce things like nitroglycerin for their use on the island from the natural resources at their disposal. What's cool, though, is that Verne tries to give you the chemistry or physics that allowed them to do every step. And so in that sense, he's kind of like the original Nile Red, if that reference means anything to you. But if you're interested in castaway stories and sciencing from scratch, I highly recommend this book, and specifically I recommend this edition because it says it is a new unabridged translation by Sidney Kravitz, and it says unabridged for a reason. Because back in the day when Jules Verne was so popular, writing in French, they frantically translated his stuff into English, but to do it quickly in a way that appealed to the populace, they cut out a lot of sections, including a lot of the science that he talked about, apparently. So this book is a newer translation that has all that lost content, including the science in it, and additionally it has a lot of great endnotes that kind of explain things as you go. So Jules Verne's characters in this book thought that the Swiss Emily Robinson cheated a little bit by having so many resources supplied by their wrecked ship. Maybe next time we'll talk about what Chesterton's characters in Man Alive thought about the Swiss Emily Robinson. But in the meantime, I have to figure out what to do with the rest of this lumber so I can be ready for tomorrow, and I guess I also need to prepare for my defense or something. See y'all.